It's the gift you get for the man who has everything. Here's your look at McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Mongul. Mongul is the brutal ruler of the planet-sized weapon of mass destruction called Warworld. Using Warworld to conquer planets across the cosmos, the tyrant enslaves the inhabitants and forces the strongest among them to serve in his horde army or suffer uncertain fate in his gladiator-style games for his amusement. Mongul's immense size, rock-like body, and rapid regeneration make him nearly invincible, and his super strength, speed, and agility make him almost unstoppable. Just before looking at the Warlord of Warworld, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys, who were kind enough to provide this sample of Mongul that we can have a look at in this video. Grabbing now the tape measure, in a moment I'll bring in a couple of figures for comparisons, but for right now, let's stick with the basics. The basics of for how tall the figure at least is, taking the tape measure tells us that he's about 9 inches. In fact, he's exactly 9 inches in height, and that works out to be a figure that's 23 centimeters tall. For the comparisons, I wanted to compare him with Superman. I also wanted to compare him with a pretty ticked-off Superman, and seems no more ticked-off of a Superman than the one that got packaged along with Destroyer. That's a pretty angry-looking Superman. But even still, as angry as he may be, Superman still manages to only go to about the elbow area of Mongul. That's how much taller the figure stands. And speaking of also tall standing figures, here's what he also looks like next to Bane. You'll probably be seeing Bane coming back a lot of times. He's now my new favorite go-to figure from the DC Multiverse line. And while it may seem like they're sharing a lot of similar molds, I can see they've retooled, for example, like the bicep and the shoulder. But I'm wondering if maybe they've used the same forearms and maybe the same hands as Bane. Mongul is still a lot taller than Bane. Bane is only going to the shoulder section of Mongul. He's that much bigger. As big as Mongul may be, unfortunately he doesn't come with any accessories other than a display stand and a trading card, to which we'll have a look at first. Trading card first, and as you can see, we actually get comic source material, as we get an illustrated image of what Mongul looks like. Costume-wise, this is a little bit more, I believe, of a modern costume for Mongul. You can see it's a little bit different than, of course, what we get here for the figure, but the colors are about still the same. I do, again, like the fact that they use source material and not necessarily figure photography. Figure photography is fine and good for some of the cards, but I'd also like every once in a while to get source material, like an actual image, something that somebody's taken the time to draw. On the back of it, though, his real name, if you could believe it, is Mongul. He's not changing it at all for celebrity purposes. You can see as well there's 2 paragraph reads. I've already taken the liberty of reading that. I've saved you all the legwork. You're welcome. I will be putting that, though, with the rest of my cards. Generally, actually, when it comes to putting these in my binder sleeves, if anybody was curious, anybody really cared, I usually put the ones that have the illustrations or ones that actually are comic artwork. I usually put those together, and then the other ones that are in the figure photography, I usually segregate them and have them separate. Just because I like the idea of having the cards with illustrations on one, and then like I said, I keep all the ones that have the figure photography together. Does anybody really care? Nobody really cares. Okay, we'll put that to the side. I'm sure some of you care. He does come also included with a display stand. Yes, very observant viewers will notice right away. It's the same stand that we've gotten with all the other times before. They could have also included the mega-sized display stands that generally are assigned more for the Spawn figures. But I think when it comes to big figures like this, maybe the larger size stands will do a better job. Although really, to be fair, Mongul stands fine on his own. Technically doesn't even really need this. I always keep this in a baggie. Whenever I need an extra display stand for DC, I simply just go to that one standard baggie, the one token baggie, and I pull out the stand that I need. This one's going to go along with those. Putting those to the side, the figure doesn't come in, like I said, with anything else. I would have liked if he could have come included with like a little blade weapon. Something that we even see in that Justice League episode for the man who has everything. Great episode if you never had the chance to check that out. Mongul makes an appearance in. I think he only makes one other appearance in the cartoon series other than that. But it certainly is a standout series episode if you ever get the chance to check that out. So here we have Mongul, an oversized version of Mongul, and I gotta say, the figure does look good. He lacks a little bit, honestly, in some of the paints. But again, we'll talk more about that. Let's pick the figure up right now. He's pretty heavy, but he's not as heavy as you may think he is. I think the torso, for example, is likely a hollow plastic, which is fine. It gets the job done. It's not necessarily meaning that the figure's an inferior figure for being hollow plastic. The harder plastic, of course, is still being used for his arms. It's still being used for his legs. So if they have to give him more of a hollow body, I don't know if you can actually tell that or not by just me knocking it, but it feels like almost more of a shell case. Head sculpt couldn't be happier with what we get here from Mongul's face. Not only I think it's a good looking head sculpt, but I also like the way they've painted this, adding some much needed darker paint around the areas of his eyes so the eyes stand, I feel, out a little bit more. He's got these tiny, tiny little chiclet teeth, and they've been nicely painted and outlined in black. He's got what really would be a very cocky facial expression on his face. Mongul is a character you definitely would not have wanted to give a neutral expression to. Mongul should have a big smile from ear to ear, or somewhat ear to ear, as he doesn't really actually have ears here on his face. The silver has been nicely handled here for the back of his, back essentially of his domed head. And then he's also got the same matching silver there added to the top of his torso here in the shoulder. He does have the little glowing stone here in green, and a few little sprinkles of blue added in there as well for some of the wiring that he has that wraps around to the back and basically attaches to the back of the body here. None of this will impede actually the articulation on the figure. In fact, it's only really just the head. He granted does have the collars there on the sides of his shoulders. That is going to make things a little tighter quarters, but he can still easily move his head back and forth and up and down. I know we're rushing into articulation. Let's not do that just yet. But I do like the head sculpt quite a lot. I think they've handled Mongul perfectly. I don't really think there's anything I would have done differently to the head sculpt. Maybe they probably could have added a wash, for example, to maybe some of the chrome just to add some wear and tear to it, because it looks really clean. It doesn't look like he's ever really in battle. I guess more of the times he has the gladiators doing all the fighting and he sits back and just admires it. A little bit of silver there added down below. He's got this little hose you have to be a little bit careful of. This is softer plastic. Not that any bit is affected by his articulation. Again, when it comes to his torso, this is nowhere to be found. It's not going to be anywhere close to his waist, but just be careful. This is just a little string of plastic that dangles out from the top of, this contraption that he has on the back of his torso. The arms are nicely detailed, that they've added and sculpted some veins in there. I do wish, though, honestly, like the arms are a little on the more, I don't want to describe it as pasty, but just because there's no extra color added to it, there's nothing really to break up so much of this yellow that's being used. I understand certainly Mongul has yellow skin, but maybe if they had gone and painted in some of the veins, for example, just to break up a lot of that yellow that they're using here. Now, again, why the reason I brought Bane in for comparisons? First of all, I really like the Bane figure. But second of all, also, I did want to bring out the arms. Now, I can obviously notice the fact that these are differently tooled arms. The shoulders and biceps, while still looking very similar, Mongul has a lot more veins on both the biceps and his shoulders than what Bane had. But they're very, very similar. I have to wonder if maybe they took the same mold and tooled it differently when it came to the release of Mongul. That way they could still get mileage out of the mold. They only just have to tweak the parts that they want to change. The forearms also seem very similar, although you wouldn't be able to really see what's going on underneath this, as he has these large emerald-colored, these kind of gauntlets that he has, these bracelets that he has around his arms. These, by the way, are softer plastic, so it looks like they probably would have just slid these over top of his existing forearms and painted them really actually quite nicely as well. But I got to think, like, underneath that, he probably has very similar forearms to Bane. One thing I also did want to mention, though, too, is that when it comes to his hands, I thought the hands were the same until realizing, obviously, the big one. Mongul's only got 3 fingers and a thumb. Bane's got him beat by 1 extra digit. So it's obviously not the same hand, but very similar style of thumbs. Obviously not the same hand, though. So maybe they may have used some of the molds here that were originally used for Bane, at least more for his arms, and maybe just tooled it differently, adding the veins for Mongul. He's a lot more veinier than Bane. Hopefully Bane doesn't have vein envy. As for the rest of his body, not a lot of paint happening here. It looks more like the plastic that they would have used. You've got kind of this darker purple blue that they've used for the top of his tunic. This, by the way, like other figures before, generally is a softer plastic. It helps to conceal, of course, the joints when we start talking more about the articulation, even though we kind of look through some of the articulation on the figure. But this covers over the tops of his thighs. So essentially, like, the joints are still inside of that. Because of that, it's a little bit more of a softer plastic. But again, you've got the really nice silver that they've used here for the belt. I'm going to spin this around so you can see it from the back there as well. It's a matching silver, at least for what they used for the top of his shoulders as well. Yeah, they probably could have added a little bit of paint added in there as well. Just a little wash. That's all I ask from time to time. But still a nice looking belt. And again, down below, he's got purple leggings, and he's got silver boots. Again, the same silver used for the belt, same silver used for the torso. Really, overall, he comes together really nicely. Okay, I know we've already teased this a couple of times. Let's look at the articulation here for Mongul. Now, his head is technically on a ball joint. It gets only to about this point where you realize right away you got to stop. You got to stop what you're doing, because you're going to start wearing away the side. The face likely is still molded. I don't think they've actually painted this in the yellow. Maybe they have. If they have, you don't really want to be running this so close to the sides of... This at least is softer plastic, but I think that may start wearing some of the paint there on his chin if they have, in fact, painted the face. But the head still looks up, and it does look down, as he certainly looks down on all the people below, all his minions, so to speak. And the head also does rock back and forth. When it comes to Mongul's arms, the arms do come out. And again, like when you're feeling the figure or when you're picking him up, he feels, again, very light here, but he has the harder plastic here for his arms. The arms hinge out at 90 degrees. They can also take the arms and rotate them all the way around. All the way around. Figure has a single hinge in the elbow, but does still allow the arm to rotate back and forth. And he does also have hand articulation, where you can rotate them all the way around. But I don't know if you can actually see that. As I'm rotating the hand, you can see how the plastic stretches around that. Again, this is a softer plastic that they would have used. It's smart because they would have then been able to still use the same forearm for other figures and simply just take the part that has to be retooled and have that piece as a piece that slides over top of it. Upper torso rotates, as he does have a ball joint. The legs don't seem... They're on ratcheted joints, but they don't make that familiar... Or maybe this side does. This side doesn't as much. It ratchets only just by a little bit, but at least the legs do hinge out. Little on the tighter quarters, though. You're only going to be able to move the leg out that far. And you can also move the leg back that far. Mongul does also possess a double hinge on the knee. He has no articulation here for the boot. It's just a continuation from the lower calf. But he does have at least ankle pivots. And you can also see as well, when I'm moving the leg, how the top of this starts to curl, as they have used softer plastic here in the boot as well. He does also have an ankle pivot that rocks back and forth this way. And Mongul has the ever required, not always necessarily required, but he does also have the toe articulation as well. Nice looking figure. Really, really nice looking figure. Mongul is one of those characters where I don't think of him right away as a big baddie in the DC universe, but certainly my introduction to him in the original Justice League cartoon, of course, as he battles Superman, it was a figure I hoped at some point down the road that McFarlane's team would eventually produce. They actually came out with him a lot sooner than expected, at least for me. I expected really this guy to come out a lot later down the road. And if anything, I would have expected him to be not only smaller, but likely a Build-A-Figure too, where actually you would have had to have build Mongul by, of course, picking up the rest of the figures from that specific wave. I'm glad you don't have to do that. I'm usually fine to buy all these figures anyways from Build-A-Figure waves, but I like the idea of sometimes just being able to outright buy a figure. I'm glad that Mongul was released on his own, and he turned out to be a great-looking figure. And in the end, while maybe Mongul isn't sharing as much of the mold of Bane that I thought he was, I do think down the road, this guy likely, his mold, will be using for an eventual release of Darkseid. I hope when we eventually do get ourselves a Darkseid, not the one that's tied into the Snyderverse, but more of a comic-centered Darkseid, I hope he's going to be as big and bulky as what we're getting here with Mongul. And, you know, it's got to make some logical sense as well. McFarlane's team, like any other company, is going to want to get as most mileage out of their mold as they can. If they already have the blueprints in place for Mongul here, I think they could probably use a lot of this and just retool it to give us a Darkseid. And if we eventually get ourselves a Darkseid of this size, of this stature, and looking like a comic Darkseid, yes, sign me up for that. In the meantime, though, not fast-tracking ourselves too far ahead, I'm actually really, again, happy that we got ourselves a Mongul. He's got a classic enough look to him. I mean, they've updated his suit just a little bit, but it's still enough of Mongul of what I recognize, and you can't beat that face. That is a classic-looking Mongul with a big smile from ear to ear, an arrogant smile. It's perfect for a character like this. Paint, admittingly, isn't as good as maybe it could have been. They probably could, again, have added a wash, at least in some of the silver. The silver, I feel, is maybe a little too clean. Maybe just adding a paintbrush of black, just a little bit, just brushing that across the surface of the silver. Could have maybe just added some contrasting of darker colors, but, you know, other than that, just overall happy with the look of Mongul. Could he have included perhaps an accessory? Yes. But that would also have involved them giving him a brand new hand, because of course the hands right now aren't suited for holding accessories. They may be suited for strangling the Man of Steel, but they're not suited certainly for holding anything like a weapon. What do you guys think of Mongul? Let me know down below in the comments section. And do you also suspect, we can all be detectives, that they're likely going to be using this mold? I'm calling it now. They're going to likely use this mold for comic Darkseid down the road, because they probably don't have to change all that much. The tunic is about the same. Yeah, it's a little bit different on top for Mongul's shoulders. But I think a lot of this will probably be reused for Darkseid. Calling it now. Calling it now. Big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane's team that did provide this sample of Mongul that we can have a look at in this review. What do you guys think of the figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. And as well, if you enjoyed this video, hit with a like. If you're loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly do want to stick around for more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and that you're turning on the bell notification. Because while we have wrapped up things for Mongul right now, there will be more DC Multiverse reviews coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.